Julia,
Yeah.
I get my hair cut both in Virginia and in Texas. It's a Texas cut.
Okay.
So the price of my Texas haircut is about 1/3 the cost of my Virginia
Of course.
haircut, which I just think is, and and part of it is I think the woman here in Texas actually is independently wealthy and just cuts hair for fun.
Oh, that's part of it. That's probably a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Good find.
Yeah.
Can I go to her?
Yeah, exactly. Can I buy?
Well, we started out arguing. You were saying that you're afraid that I don't love that this is unscripted. So visually, when it comes to speaking, I really love unscripted. But when it comes to the static description of what's on
Yeah.
the episode and the picture and all that, I really love it to be the same. And so anyway, that's what that is.
Yeah, we're having a little tussle about that where and I find this somewhat ironic. The government bureaucrat for many, many years and former CIA senior official, I'm like, whatever, let 1,000 flowers bloom. I'm good with it.
And
I'll let Julia
weirdo
describe
psychic,
her own position.
as the weirdo psychic scientist who, is like in love with the mystical and the unknown. I'm like, I think we should make sure everything's numbered carefully and put in its file.
Well, that makes you an excellent pair. You're like the odd couple, but also probably very highly functional,
Well, thank you.
right?
Suzanne, I listened to all 3 episodes of the season 3 this morning
Yeah.
when I was taking a walk.
Well, thank you.
Aren't they compelling?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. And I don't think you had any context probably for any of
Well,
it.
the
So
only
I'm
context I have is the context I have, like, because I know Julia. That's my context. So, and I actually did take remote viewing. I don't even think I would call it 101. Remote viewing
Zero.
0 with Julia.
Mm.
Gosh, it's almost 4 years now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think I took that also.
Yes.
Right.
so, I actually know what you mean when you talk about a transcript, and I have sheets of paper with little squiggly lines on them and strange abstract words.
Well,
So
wait a minute. So we're doing our thing where we start talking and we don't introduce our guests. So
yes,
as a guest today, we we do this a lot, Suzanne. Sorry. We have the wonderful Suzanne Clores. And Suzanne, will you describe the extraordinary project and what you wanted to do in season 3 so that we can give the listeners context and then we'll delve deep?
Yeah, I definitely will. And I'm also a big fan of unscripted and kind of rambling. So I'm very happy with the ramble. I think I'm like a more of a listener with the Zoom rambling, but like just wait till you get me going, right? I'll start rambling. So I'm very happy to be here with the Pandas, playing cello. And yeah, the extraordinary project. So I have boiled it down to kind of a snappy phrase, which is it's a podcast and a project where the super personal meets the supernatural. And I say supernatural kind of lightly because when I say it, I don't mean not real. I mean more, almost more real, hyper real, and extraordinary in the way that the events, the mystical, exceptional experiences that we all have that we don't really talk about are extraordinary. So, near-death experiences, telepathic connections, precognitive dreams, all of these things are put in the bin of extraordinary. So the podcast has been 3 seasons of exploring these concepts, talking to people who have had these experiences, trying to like grapple with how to frame them in everyday life.
And in your thinking and in your personal Like you also take the listener onto a personal journey or into a personal journey of how you're experiencing this and how you're trying to update your knowledge base.
Yes. So that's yeah, it's a personal frame. Exactly. It's a personal frame. And, my idea was by making it personal, it then kind of becomes universal so that other people can lift the frame um, and measure it against their own.
Very cool. How did you come to be interested in or involved in the supernatural? I mean, was it just something that you had known about yourself your entire life, or how did
Um,
that happen?
Yeah, I kind of knew about it my entire life and tamped it down because it was unclear what it was. So anytime I've had a handful, maybe two handfuls of experiences over the course of my life. So not every day, but often enough to notice and to be influenced by them, whether it's just being super sensitive to someone's emotions or someone's thinking, or actually having information come to me in these different ways, hearing information, seeing information, seeing, different types of people or dreams or, a variety of things under a variety of circumstances. So
Are you going to
I,
tell about your childhood, how you were raised? Or
oh,
is
I
that,
could. I
I
mean,
think that's super interesting. And I think that's part of the story, my friend.
yeah, it is. It's yeah, it's like the origin story.
Yeah.
So when I was about 9, which is in the 1979, 1980, um, it was very popular at the time for adults to take like human potential classes, right? So EST was a very popular program, but also so was the Silva mind control method. And my
How do you
um,
spell that? Silva, like
Silva, Silva,
Silva?
yeah, his name was Jose Silva, and he was an inventor and like a meditation experimenter. And he developed this system of positive thinking that quickly spread throughout like the developing human potential movement, and it made its way to New York City, where my mother was taking classes at the New School. And she met an instructor, and she took the class and was so blown away by meditation, positive thinking, the idea of taking control of your mind in this way, that she enrolled me in the children's program. And so yeah, so I think I was 9 and practicing these methods of what I know now are pretty heavy duty meditation methods, um, remote healing methods, telepathic exercises. They had different language, but that's what they were. And it kind of dovetailed with this other family experience where a friend moved into our home. A friend of my parents moved into our home, and we were caring for him as he was dying. So there was like a lot of application opportunities for a young 9-year-old to try and
So
have,
positive.
yes, think positive, try to heal.
Yeah.
Um, but in some ways, I feel like that origin moment flipped a switch in me, and kind of created an exposure, or introduced me to this world that I never really forgot and actually can't shake in a way, for better or worse.
Do you remember as a 9-year-old how that felt, or whatever verb you want to put in there, how you thought about it, how you felt, how you experienced it?
I mean, I think I was very performative and so wanted to do it well.
Mhm.
I think like that was the first part. And then I think the second part was it felt real. Like I wasn't really imagining the things that I was seeing. Like it felt like there was another reality that I could sort of access. Um, even though it was in my mind. Do you know what I mean? It was a lot of guided meditation. So that I think that felt comfortable. Um, but at the same time, it was a little bit hard to integrate. Um, because or maybe it was easy to integrate. Maybe it was just kind of so available to me that I was flipping back and forth all the time. I think that might be more accurate. Yeah. I don't know. Is this news to you? Have you heard of this program at all?
Me? No, yeah, never heard of it. No.
But
Okay.
I definitely had heard of it. I was scared of it because I thought the mind control meant trying to control other people's minds. I didn't get for the longest time until I met you that it was about trying to control your own mind, which is a worthy goal and what meditation does. But I also can see how, like, I mean, because my parents were into us for a period of time and it was like horrible. I could also see how that like might not have been. I mean, you're talking about the positive sides of that, but I also see why when you say for better or for worse, not being able to shake that experience and having to grapple with it, I can see why you now produce this podcast, The Extraordinary Project, that actually grapples with it because you know it's real, but also like it doesn't match what the rest of the world says is real.
Right. It's and I think like for a long time I just tried to do what most people do, which is say like, oh, that isn't there. Like it's not there. There's no
Yeah, it's just
it's just a thing that you do like an activity, but there's no location there. Like you're not altered by it. There's no influence. And but I think over time I have seen that there is influence and it is a location. And that's interesting to me. I think it's because I don't think it's just me. I think it's a location for everybody, right?
whether you go there ever in your lifetime or not,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's kind of how that's sort of how I got on this path, and that's kind of my lens. Um, and then I guess I met Julia. This is much later, but I met Julia, and Julia was like the first human I met who was able to really confirm that this was a place and a location, um, in a way that didn't just feel personal and internal and like, in the context of um, a program, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So we had a great collaborative friendship or quickly, which continues. And when I started this project, I don't remember if I met you before or after, but I think a lot of the science world that exists around this area of consciousness and like the extended mind, a lot of the science world became more clear to me because of our friendship.
You started I went to the first event in Andersonville that
Oh,
you
right.
had for the Extraordinary Project. You were just starting it.
I was just starting it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was about 10 years ago. It
Yeah.
was about 10 years ago. And so it's been a pet project. I had originally planned to write a book, and then a funny thing happened in that I started collecting all of this audio, recording people. And I have a background in audio. Briefly, I worked for a NPR documentary producer. And as I was trying to sort through all the material for the book, I was listening to tape after tape after tape. And I thought, I could do this in a different way. I could make something that people can hear, and it can kind of bypass the intellect that way. It can kind of go right to the emotional heart. So
Yay.
yeah.
That's an interesting observation because, I mean, is there a recognized hierarchy of or correlations between how the input device and how, whether we receive it emotionally or clinically or something like that?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You know how Trump was she's an auditory learner? That's a very intuitive mode.
Mm.
It's because it's an extra translation step to get to the words, right? That you have a meaning that's already there, and then you have to put these words on top of them. It's like translating it into a new language. But while when you speak words, you're conveying also the same, quote unquote, the same thing as in text. You're conveying them with your voice, right? And so the different voice and the different tones of voice and the timbre and everything conveys just a shit ton more. And that stuff goes straight to your right hemisphere.
There you go. It's the vibe. For me, it's like the vibration. There's something about the vibration of a voice. There's more information kind of carried on the vibration, and that your body is responding to. And even in the podcast world, it's known that most people listen to podcasts with the AirPods or headphones, and the quality of a voice is very important because it's literally in your ear, like it's a part of one body going into another body. And that's different than reading. That's a different cognitive experience. Like it's not cognitive, right,
It's
Julia?
body based. Yeah. So if you think about cognition and intuition always happens before cognition, but it also feeds cognition. But intuition can also work on its own, right? And so the body holds intuition, and then the brain's going to do some cognition with it, maybe. But maybe you could get in there and get to the first level and affect that before the cognition comes out.
Mhm. Yeah. And then part of the thinking too was most people have these experiences, but they live in a place that isn't really integrated into the body, but it is still very emotional and um accessible if someone kind of lures them there. So I sort of feel like I'm everyone's weird friend who's whispering into their ear, telling them stories in their ear. That's kind of how I look at it.
Very cool.
Yes, you are. Well, I wanted to know, so Carmen and I know a little bit about remote viewing, but maybe not the people who are listening. Are you willing to sort of like give a little summary of what drove season 3 and what it has to do with remote viewing? And it's definitely different than the other 2 seasons, which are more focused on like different people's stories and such. And this is a real particular story.
And let me just add here, if I may, that the people who watch Pandas, because we put excerpts on LinkedIn, which I think get a lot of viewers, and we're trying to grow the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
They're either followers of me, people of my network, or they're people of Julia's network. And so
Yeah.
we are talking two completely diametrically opposed, well, not completely diametrically opposed, but significantly opposed networks of people. And
Yeah.
I represent the far left corner of people who end up working in the intelligence community. I can say that with great confidence. And
She's not
so
lying.
almost everyone is to the right of me. I go, left is over here. Oh, never mind. They're to the right of me, and they're, and there's actually a pretty big gap between where I am and the next person. And
You're
so
not
they're,
talking about politically, are you?
no, no,
Like,
no, I'm
you're
not
talking,
talking politically.
yeah,
I'm just talking like if left is new innovation, non-material,
right.
and right is material status
Practical
quo.
physics.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's practical business.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And
That-
so those people are just skeptical about this topic
Right.
from the get-go. And I see things that they write often that I'm going, you're you're just representing a bias. You're actually not applying your own principles of how to think
Mhm.
critically about something to this issue. You're just knee-jerk bias, no way.
Mhm.
And anyway, I just wanted to throw that in because you're talking to both of these audiences.
And
Okay.
my audience is like, of course.
Right.
Well, do you have a problem with this?
I don't understand. Like, next, what did you do in your past life?
Yeah. And I get both of those audiences, and I think thank you for saying that, Carmen, because I did not really know where you were in the intelligence community. I think if I had to guess, I would say you were on the new frontier, or like the more exploratory, I don't want to say radical, but like more you said it well already. You said like new, right? Like the new ideas, bringing new ideas into the old ways, right?
Yes.
I'm glad to know that. So, okay, this is kind of a combination of those two worlds too, because this story is a true crime story in a way. It's more of a mystery, a true crime mystery. Um, and my previous seasons, yes, were kind of one story at a time, one story per episode. And this one was one longer story over the course of 3 episodes. And I had wanted, since I learned about remote viewing, I had wanted to apply it to a real cold case. Like I wanted to see what would happen. And I never actually thought I would do that on my own. Um, Julia and I had worked on something for quite a long time on the same topic. And I sort of felt like this is too hard. I can't imagine ever doing this on my own. All the reasons why you don't do things. And I received a note, as I say in the podcast, from over a listserv from a random person who I didn't know, who was looking for her missing sister, who had been missing for over 30 years, I think. So since 1989. And she was just at her wit's end. And so she was looking for an investigative podcast to take it on. And I kind of knew immediately that that would be a perfect opportunity to put a remote viewer on the case. And I have a friend who's a remote viewer. She's very, very skilled. I sent her the FBI sheet right away and said, "Do you want to do this?" And she called me and said, "Well, I'm not going to look at," and without even looking at this, I already know this person is not alive and that they're in multiple pieces. And I thought, this is valuable. Like, this is an important story to tell because she had such a fast response. There is always the question of verifying something like that. So, verifying remote viewers, which I really hope to do. So as we've been going through this case, it's 3 episodes long. I had to end it because the way the bureaucracy is working in this small town in Pennsylvania, they're not really paying attention to it anymore. But it felt important to me to kind of represent the remote viewing approach to a cold case, but also what working with a remote viewer could do for the family. In this case, the sister who was searching. And so that kind of ended up being the core of the story, the relationship between those two things. I forget your question now, but that's
That was awesome.
that's my answer.
Seemed like good words.
Oh, yeah. No.
Well, let me just, what struck me about the episodes, and as you intimated, episode 3 ends sort of inconclusively, you might say, because there's more things that we hope get done.
Yeah.
But what struck me that was very powerful is that what the remote viewer saw
Mhm.
about sort of the geographic locations of the sisters' last moments, um, coordinated with what the surviving sister's own experience had been about how the feelings that she got whenever she was in this particular location. And I thought that was, extremely interesting. And I don't believe anybody was making it up.
Right. She drew a map of a location that she had never seen and never been to, that the surviving sister looked at and knew exactly where it was.
Right.
And it was kind of hard for me to emphasize. I couldn't emphasize that point enough, right?
Yes.
Like, how does that happen? How is that even possible? And I know it's not necessarily like unearthing a body, but the fact that the map was drawn and recognized meant there was a new piece of data for law enforcement to act on. And so, in that way, it felt like that was a win for the surviving sister. I think she felt really, um, you know, she was of two minds, I think, throughout the whole thing. Like, she wanted to be relieved and gratified, but at the same time, I think there was just so much trauma around searching and not finding, that it's almost too, she almost can't bear to go to the police with that map, because she just doesn't want to be told no, or that she doesn't want it to be in error. There are just many different layers to it. So I think, though, it's something that they could take and bring some dogs to the location. Maybe in spring, we're hoping, they'll sort of find some time to do it in the spring.
I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe it helps. I mean, so, I'm sorry, coming from a proof point of the science now, it doesn't help for people to know, or for the police department to know, like, I've worked with this particular remote viewer before. We're not naming her on purpose because she chooses to be unnamed.
Right.
And she did some missing persons cases for me, and she was very good, but everyone was dead. Like, and then after a while, I'm like, gosh, she thinks everyone is dead. Is she just a negative Nelly? And then I realized, like, no, I was new to the missing persons psychic game, and the reality is most of them are dead. And and she helped pinpoint where this team, she was a big person on this team that helped pinpoint where a body did wash up. It, like, literally out of the entire United States found the beach. Right. And so I wonder if they knew things like that about this particular person, if that would help. See, I know what this gets to really is, you have a group of people who could offer excellent information about something that could potentially help, but you also have this incredible taboo or disbelief or skepticism around it. So it's kind of like you get to an impasse. And what do you see there? Because a lot of what you talk about in your show, to me, is like, I guess maybe also I'm familiar with the taboo, but is how to get through that impasse.
It's a really good question. I mean, it's a personal impasse for everyone, and it's a cultural impasse. So there's two layers. Um, one idea was, because she has a long relationship with this police department, and it's, on and off, positive and contentious, because they don't have the resources that they need. Like, this is a very common story. It's not personal to her, but it feels personal. Um, one suggestion we had was, go to the detective who you worked with previously on this case, who was close to you, who you felt close to, but who has since retired. See if bring him this information, and see what he says. And I think on some level, I'm waiting for her to be ready to do that. So it's not just like, oh, the police department will not believe me, so I'm not going to do it. It's for her, someone who is open to psychic work, but really hadn't worked with a remote viewer or anyone at this level before, like, I think she has barriers to get through before she brings the information. So it takes time. I think it takes time. And one thing we tried to do in the experience was just try, her name is Kath, try to bring Kath in touch with her sister, as her sister is now, which is no longer in the body, no longer alive, but in this limbo space of being trapped in the trauma of the crime, in the conversation of the crime, in the in everyone's memory of the crime. Like, that's like the only context that anyone now thinks about her sister. So the task was try to talk to her now that you know where she is, try to talk to her and try to move out of this place of only concentrating on the crime. So that just takes time.
Yeah.
It felt a lot like I learned a lot about the other side of remote viewing in this project, meaning it's actually not just about finding a missing person, but it's about the healing. And the healing from the loss, the grief that is so necessary, and the moving on from the event, because it is just one event. But most people don't think of remote viewing. Oh, you had asked me to describe what remote viewing is, and I never did.
Oh, wait, how were you about to finish that sentence?
Oh,
It's not one event. It's
so a missing person is not like, it's not just one event in the continuum of someone's life. Like, it's I don't know, I may have lost my train of thought, but it was important to get the surviving sister.
It's also about healing, I
Yeah.
think. Yes.
Yeah. To kind of look at life beyond that event.
right. The whole timeline matters, and the timeline includes after she dies and there's healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Julie, if you want to go down whatever you were going to ask.
Oh, yeah. We've
Explain
talked
more about remote viewing, but I
We've
have a point
yeah.
that I want to make at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, and I have to plug in my computer, and I will be right back. I just realized I need to plug it
We're
in.
pausing. We'll edit.
We're pausing.
Yes,
Edit.
okay. But you're still here. But I am going to slightly slide off camera, but I
Yeah.
can still hear you because I'm looking for something. Then
Okay.
I'll bring it right back. So
I'll just be the surviving panda for the moment.
we'll edit all this out. No, not to worry. Let's see. Is it in here? That's what I want to know. Oh. Not in here. All right, not in there. Julia's not back. All right, I'm gonna go look over here.
Yeah, go ahead. Are you looking for a book?
Yes, but you know what? I found it the other day. Now I do not know what it is. Oh, well.
I
This
just
is-
realized I
This is
left.
my mom's house,
Okay.
which I have inherited. And
I just realized I left my dog's crappy blanket in the frame behind me.
I was really enjoying it. All right. We're back.
Okay.
So you were going to describe remote viewing, and then Carmen had a question.
Okay, well, I'll just throw in my question because maybe you'll answer it as part of remote viewing. But when you were just talking about the healing, and when I listened to the episode, it kind of framed this whole question of whether or not remote viewing is a fraud or delusional or whatever words you want to use, because, you know, at several moments, the remote viewer has to describe what happened to the sister, to the surviving sister, and it's very graphic. And so I got to thinking, you know, what kind of person would do that
Right.
to a surviving loved one? You know, if it wasn't actually coming from a real place, you know, I mean, obviously there are horrible sadistic people in this world, but I presumably you screen for those, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't have them involved in this. But anyway, that was it just kind of brought this, you know, I had never really thought about what you're saying when you're saying it's fake. What you're saying is this person is maliciously bringing suffering to another person
Yeah.
by doing all this fakery.
Like that's what the skeptic says.
Yes, yes.
Right. And they get angry. They're like, oh, they're taking advantage of their grief, or they're making something up so that it sounds like they've come up with information, but really they have, like, it almost doesn't make sense. Like that position doesn't even make sense in a lot of ways. Um, but I understand why people feel that way, because no one wants to be taken advantage of. Like,
Mhm.
and especially in terms of like a very vulnerable event in your life. Um, you that's sort of the lowest of the low. Like someone who would take advantage of a grieving person is that's right next to taking advantage of the elderly, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
criminal. Um, so this viewer doesn't do work unless she's asked to do it. She doesn't advertise. I think plenty of people ask her, you know, she's cautious about saying who she's worked with, but I know that she's done government work before. Um, I know that she has helped families around the world uh, with their missing loved ones. Um, and there's even a moment, I think it's in episode 2, where she kind of talks about her origin story, about how it started involuntarily, where the energy of the missing would approach her, would kind of appear to her like a figure, and she would be able to see their clothes and their hair, and she learned to kind of listen to what they had to say. um, but in this one particular case, this energy was not saying anything to her, even though she could see what her outfit was and what her hair was. But it showed her the sequence of the crime. Um, and as she tells that story, she talks about both seeing the crime and feeling the crime. And she said, as a viewer, that was the first time she understood that she had both of those abilities, that she could both see what happened and then jump into the shoes of the experiencer and experience what happened. And I thought, gosh, that's specific.
Mhm.
Like, that is just a very, very specific bodily ability. And I guess because of my background, I knew on some level this is possible. Like I know that it's possible, but usually people have to practice to do that. And she really doesn't. And so in that way, I think she had to spend years almost training herself to block information from coming in, because it was very traumatic. After a while, she started seeing a lot of missing people, and she said she needed to do a lot of work to kind of put out the message, like, do not approach me unless I'm asked. Like, I won't be able to help you unless someone asks me to help you. So I know we're getting kind of ethereal right now, but to me, what was so compelling about this viewer and bringing her into this story is that she really has a personal system. She has a way of dealing with remote viewing that she has cultivated over years. And she learned to remote view. She's really a natural psychic, but she learned to remote view to kind of put a different type of structure around her work. And that seems like very rare and very valuable. And yeah, I think the bleeding heart in me really felt like, oh, I hope we can help this woman. Maybe we can help this family. Maybe we can bring them to a place of closure. And I don't know that we did, but we did something. And so I learned a lot doing this story also. I think one thing I didn't count on was when you're working in audio, you need to listen to material over and over and over and over again in order to get the right cut.
Oof.
And so I listened to a lot of those graphic descriptions and cut them down actually from much longer descriptions. And that was rough. Like that was actually, I think, that was like an immersion training. I think war reporters probably go through training for that kind of thing.
Or probably
Or
don't
not,
and
or
just get
not, or not.
trained.
They
or
just,
not, or they
they're
just get
just
trained.
thrown into it.
Yeah. So that was, I hadn't thought of that. But it was necessary to tell the story properly. And I will say Kath was really, she was so grateful, I think, to be heard and to have her experience broadcast in a way that was also a layer of healing. So this ended up being like a healing project. As it turns out, like
Like
I
like
think
all
pretty
of them.
much, like pretty much that's what life is. It's either healing
right.
or unhealing, whatever
Or yeah,
that.
waiting to get healed.
Yeah, it's either healing or waiting to get healed. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
Do you want me to briefly describe what remote viewing is?
Yeah, that would be great.
And that makes me think, not this time, but at a future Pandas, maybe we can do a remote viewing session with our worldwide audience and see what happens. Why not?
Happens.
That's a
That
good
would be
idea.
great. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
And we'll see, maybe we'll find something great.
Yeah.
Well, we could
Anyway.
do that now. We could also do it now.
No, but we're not really prepared for it. I mean,
Right, but that
so,
might be the right time to do it.
but I think we're already like
Here,
40 minutes
here comes the
into it.
CIA executive. You see,
Every once in a while I show up, yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and I mean, I think it needs to be like advertised as such, and then we'll do it, and then
Okay, yeah, we'll make a thing out of it. Right, I
yeah.
always forget that. So, what is remote viewing? So that's what we've been talking about for this 40 minutes. So there's general psychic functioning. So that includes things like clairvoyance, getting information about the state of the world without necessarily reading someone's mind. Telepathy, which is essentially reading someone's mind. Precognition, which is the capacity to predict future events. And psychokinesis, which is the ability to change something in the world with just using your mind. And no physical forces that we recognize yet. So those are kind of the big four. And remote viewing kind of combines them all into a protocol that's supposed to make things a little bit more technical. It was created by the military and parts of the intelligence community back in the late 70s and in a project that ended up ending in 1995 called Stargate at the very end, although it had a lot of different names. And it was sort of packaged in a way that I think brilliantly by Ingo Swann, the artist who created this packaging. He trained it and packaged it in a way that puts it into a real protocol. Like you write down this number and you do this thing, and then on this part of the page you do this, but on the other part of the page you do that, and you have a lot of energy. And the particular remote viewer we're talking about also does these kind of things. You have a lot of energy put into making these precise things so that the part of your brain that's worried about the executive function of this whole process can feel satisfied that it's really doing something. And what
I'm organizing something here. This is good.
exactly, this is good. I'm organizing this so that the intuitive part can go, okay, here's the information. So I kind of don't think it matters how you organize it as long as you believe that that's the way to do it and that's really going to work and that's going to, make it happen.
And it's used to find missing people, among other things.
Oh,
Now,
sorry, I should say now it is used quietly in every law enforcement division, including Department of Justice, and in some, like, as some intelligence contractors will use it. And I don't think there's any sort of in government, like, paid employees who do it for their work, but there are probably people who do it as a hobby. I mean, it's a very widespread sort of technology and not a lot of talk about it from the side of any sort of organization that might be considered blighted if people knew that they used this, but use of it nonetheless.
So I'll put on my intelligence community national security hat. I should go find myself a hat that I just put on
yes.
It should be very silly if you do that.
as a signal for it, but all my good hats are in Virginia. Anyway, uh, you know, the US culture is a very young culture.
Mhm.
I mean, we've got antecedent cultures, French, German, Italian, English, Irish,
Spanish.
Spanish, that are much older than ours. But all of those cultures went through the Reformation and then the Enlightenment, which I think had a significant, I'm going to use the word scarring, but not necessarily. It kind of left marks on all those cultures. And now in the, you know, I hate it when people talk about national security only in terms of conflict. It drives me nuts. And I want to say to any young person listening here that if someone tells you that that's the only way we can talk about national security, they are wrong, and don't let them do that to you.
Mhm.
Okay, anyway, but all these cultures that seem to be in opposition to the Eurocentric culture are all cultures that for the most part, did not go through the Enlightenment. They didn't go through a Reformation, which was like a tremendous challenge to their religious beliefs.
Mhm.
Therefore, did not do the Renaissance and didn't do the Enlightenment. So we got China, we got Russia, we got Iran, we got Korea.
All of Africa.
We can talk about many others. And so all those other cultures have deep understanding still of something other than a material world.
Mhm. Mhm.
Did you say
And
Russia? Russia's also in there.
yeah, Russia, I said
Yeah,
Russia. I
yeah.
mean, the Russian culture as a culture is such a magnificent culture. I mean, if you know anything about their religious tradition, their literary tradition, their artistic tradition, their mathematical tradition, I mean, they are just an incredibly
Philosophy,
rich
yeah.
philosophy, incredibly rich culture,
Mhm.
which, you know, I can understand why so many Russians are so pissed that they are no longer considered worthy of a hearing. I get that. Anyway, sorry, stop the diatribe, Carmen. Yes. I, I just feel that we ignore the Eurocentric American culture. We're at great peril of dismissing all these truths that these other cultures know and intuit, and we go, that's just bullshit.
Right.
And at some point, that's going to hurt us.
It is hurting us.
It is hurting us in a way that we don't know. Like we can't see it because we have this block, right?
Which is a great weapon. You don't even know that there's a weapon? You say you're not defended against it? Are you kidding me?
I've never heard it framed that way before in terms of the Reformation and then the Enlightenment and the scarring that has happened.
I mean, so it's good scarring. Scars are good.
Right.
They
It's
create
growth,
good things. Yeah,
right?
it's growth.
Growth. Right.
But there's also healing to be done from it and understanding to be had that is just starting to happen.
Right. And I think if you, just to relate it back to remote viewing or even any psychic knowledge, um, you know, I think part of what I've been sensing for the better part of a decade, is that unrest in our culture that around the topic. Like the topic is very destabilizing. It's very upsetting to people. It makes them angry. It makes them immediately feel like, either you're foolish or they're foolish or both. Like it just ruins the conversation, it ruins the environment. Then there are the people who are intrigued by it, and sort of take off with it. And there's an expression that Lisette Coley, who is the president of the Parapsychology Foundation, likes to say, people who get lost in the sauce. Like it's such a rich ragu of ideas and possibilities that it can really take over. It can take over someone's thinking and someone's life. And to be honest, I've always been a little nervous about that too with this topic. So that's why I've taken it on as a storyteller. Like, how can I tell stories about this topic without, swimming in the soup all day, every day, forever? But I imagine these other cultures that haven't gone through the scarring of the Reformation, they have a system of handling this information. Like they have a culture, a history. Is that your sense too?
Oh, sure. I mean, the entire way that the China and Chinese think of ancestors and the Chinese way and Confucius and all the other great thinkers of philosophers of Chinese history. Yeah, this is just common known things in those cultures, and I don't think they're challenged in quite the same way as they are here.
There's more of a flow.
Yes, exactly.
When I went to go visit my husband's alma mater at Maharishi International University, one of the guys showing us around said, "You're going to this new house out in Virginia. Now, which direction does the door open on?" I was like, "I do not know." He said, "Well, please, can you make sure it's the north or the east? Because if otherwise there's all these people with the doors opening to this house to the south, and like how do they function?" And see, like it's that kind of thing where it's like there's a whole system, may or may
Right.
not be true in the sense of some kind of physical reality, but if that becomes true in your culture, it does matter, right? Right. And so there's also this other layer of like, regardless of sort of the scientific truth value of something, the behavioral or the belief effects, the impacts are really powerful and can move mountains.
Yep.
I think that's the other piece of it. That's the other piece of it that is very interesting to me, like the belief state and how powerful, how it can actually move mountains, as you say.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I think, it probably dovetails with remote viewing in a way. But I don't know that that's part of the training, right? I don't think it's part of the remote viewing training. I don't know. I've never done remote viewing training.
It depends on the teacher.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I think it depends. I just like it's always like, do you have a teacher that can think metacognitively or not?
Mhm.
Yeah.
What's your sense in the intelligence as from your like bureaucratic intelligence position? Like what is remote viewing more of like an outlier technology? Like, do people talk about it? Is it ever even in?
So I retired 13, now 14 years ago, actually. I retired in 2010. In my entire career, I never heard anybody once speak about remote viewing in my entire career. Since I met Julia, I've talked to a couple of people, who are retired, but they can sort of remember when, because the CIA program ended in the late 80s, early 90s, they can kind of remember little bits and pieces of that. Individuals that were involved, individuals that were advocates of it, others that, were totally against it. And that was it. And in fact, after I met Julia about 2 years ago, I wrote an article about, my goal was to introduce the idea of precognition into the conversation. And so I wrote an article about how we know, I forget, what is good thinking. And I talked a lot about intuition as kind of the entry, the gateway drug into talking about precognition. And people reacted so strongly against my talking about intuition that the fact that I was using this as a way of getting into the topic of precognition went right over their heads.
Right. So the last
Uh,
paragraph or 2 or 3 was
yeah.
about precognition.
But
No one commented on that. They're like,
no one
intuition fools you and it tricks you. And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. And I mean, to be fair, I think there were equal numbers who were kind of violently against intuition or who were really, really for it. I mean,
That's
so
good.
there were equal numbers on both sides. But what struck me as strange is that intuition was the go, no go line on this. So, to talk about precognition or the potential for precognition is just crazy. But, as I have pointed out to people, if you are a high risk, high performance organization, aviation, hospitals, astronauts, and the people doing this work are sometimes encounter moments of decision that have to be resolved very quickly, and they can be life or death.
Right.
It would be really useful for you as an organization to know which of your staff are naturally intuitive, naturally inclined to this ability to perceive, and which are not. Because now you've created a trust factor, right? This
Right.
seems to me purely logical. A good thing to do, not particularly hard to do even, but I've yet to encounter anyone who I've said this to who goes, "Oh yeah, let's get that started."
What is it?
Except for me, but I don't have the power to do that.
But is it that you named intuition? Is that part of it? It's like
I'm
that you
sorry,
It's the Reformation, right? I mean, it's this idea that you are,
enlightenment, Reformation, enlightenment, the
yeah,
mechanical view of humanity.
yeah, you are a fool. You are being tricked if you think that anything's non-material, right?
Yeah,
It's considered non-scientific, even though there's science about it.
right.
Yeah, and I mean, I get that, right? I get like the need to cling to that framework. But then you have a missing persons case where there's a viewer who draws a map of a place she's never been, and the person who is the local recognizes the geography immediately, and that something important is happening.
The argument that I am sympathetic to, that I believe is a valid point. So I would say, I believe these things happen. I believe this is a talent that certain people have, that it could be nurtured in many other people. I believe all that. But exactly how you apply it, exactly how you operationalize it is a little unclear to me, or not a little, it's still unclear to me. And
Right.
even in that entire episode that you talked about, you got to the point where you believed you knew something, but now taking these next steps, convincing other people to actually use real physical resources, money to do X, Y, or Z is hard. And that's like a small example of this bigger operational issue.
It
Right.
is huge. Yes, it's absolutely huge. And I think the recovering of, I mean, it also just gets into, oh, we didn't even talk about the perpetrator, which is
That's
another,
good.
right. It's another application of the method. And yeah, I wasn't going to spend time on that. But yeah, it does get into, it clashes with law enforcement protocol, right? I'm guessing, but lots of things do.
Right.
So you just need open-minded people to move forward with it.
Yeah, one funeral at a time, right? So I mean that's how these things change. And I'm sorry to be the one who keeps saying this, but I'm going to say, which is the reason we don't know how to operationalize it is we don't let ourselves do the very first experiment.
Mhm.
Right? You can learn a lot by doing a pilot study.
I agree. I mean, that would be what I would recommend, is
Yeah.
that we start screening people, we conduct some uh uh I don't want to call them exams, but we just conduct experiments or with people to see what we can learn about how this phenomenon occurs, because I think it clearly occurs.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing is like this, there's no doubt that that gifted people can do this. And so what does it take to get people to stop clinging to the framework? It's like I get that you're clinging to the framework, but like if an AI came and landed in front of you in a robot's body and said, "Okay, I'm going to do your job now," and then did your job beautifully, like you would have to admit that that AI was
That happens.
doing that happens. And so
Yeah.
you'd have to change your framework. That's the situation. And so I feel like there has to be something like that where it just changes your framework because it's happening.
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
Right.
The last thing I'll say about telling a true crime story like this without the payoff of a body or without the payoff of a perpetrator is that it did kind of shed light on like the horror of the genre, which is like people suffer, people die. It's not cool. It isn't um a hobby. It's painful, and it's about grief and moving on from, like, how do you actually move on? So even if we did find the body, even if we did find the perpetrator, she still needs to do the job of moving on. And
By she, you mean
the
the
surviving
victim
sister,
or the surviving sister?
the surviving sister, the
Yeah.
surviving sister. I mean, the victim would like to move on, but the victim cannot move on unless the surviving sister moves on, from what I understand. From this, you know, from this story, and also from talking to other psychics and mediums, like the living and the dead are interconnected all the time. And if you don't let your dead move on, you're kind of creating this echo chamber um, that keeps a part of them here. That's another conversation. But I think I really wanted to explore what happens in a true crime story when there's no body and there's no perpetrator. Um, there is an ending, but it's just more of like a French film ending, right? It's like it's like so I don't know. Yeah, that was like my act of rebellion against the true crime.
All right.
Um,
Well, all right. Or the tyranny of narrative.
yes, exactly.
That was my favorite thing about it. I loved that. That's what made it so real.